Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good week, and I'm glad that you're able to make it to church this morning. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to see another week alive and healthy. Thank you for bringing each and every one of us here safely. I ask that you would open our ears and our hearts to hear your word and to live it out in the coming weeks. In your precious name, amen. Alright, so we will be continuing on with our story of Isaac and Rebekah. So last week we talked about how Abraham was getting older and he wanted his son Isaac to have a wife. So he sent his trusted servant to go all the way back to his homeland in Paddan Aram to find a wife for Isaac. We saw that the servant trusted God, he prayed, and he was able to meet Rebekah and her family, who also trusted God. And then we see that she traveled all the way back to Canaan and married Isaac. And the servant was able to complete his task because he trusted God. So today we're going to be focusing on Genesis 25. We'll be talking about the story of Isaac and Rebekah. Now several years have passed. Abraham has gotten a lot older. He remarried after Sarah's death, and he had other children, but unfortunately we see that Abraham died at the age of 175 years old, and he was buried with his wife Sarah. So now the story is going to shift and focus on Isaac and his family. So Isaac and Rebekah, they were trying to have children, but sadly Rebekah could not have any. So Isaac prayed to God, and God allowed Sarah to be pregnant, and this time she was pregnant with twins, and she gave birth to two sons, Esau and Jacob. So let's read the passage, Genesis 25:19 through 28. And it reads, "These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and barren just means that she couldn't have any children. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If it is thus, why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger.'" Verse 24, "When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out, with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them." Verse 27, "When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." So in this passage we see that Rebekah, like Sarah, could not have children, but Isaac prayed for her, and God heard their prayer, so he granted their request, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. So we also learned that the babies were moving around a lot in her stomach, in her womb, so she prayed to God because she wanted to make sure things were going well with the babies. And God answered her and said, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger." So even in her stomach, in her womb, the twins were divided and different from each other. Once they were born, we see that this twin, they were a complete opposite of each other. This fulfilled partially what God said. Even their appearance was different. Esau was red with hairy skin, while Jacob had smooth skin, and their personalities were also different. Esau liked to hunt, while Jacob preferred to be in the tents. So what living in the tents meant was that Jacob preferred to be at home, either learning or studying, instead of being outside and hunting. And it's perfectly normal for siblings to like different things and to do things differently. That goes for anyone that has a sibling. For example, my sister and I like sweet things while my sister prefers salty things. We also learn from this passage that Isaac preferred Esau because he always received some of the animals that Esau would have hunted, while Rebekah preferred Jacob. This was because Jacob spent most of his time in the tent, and the same goes for Rebekah. She would have spent all of her time in the tent, so they would have gotten to be with each other a lot more. So as we continue to read, we'll see just how different the twins were. So let's continue to read from Genesis 25, verses 29 to 34. Verse 29. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. Verse 30. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So both Esau and Jacob have grown older, and we see just how different the twins were. Esau was out in the field hunting, while Jacob was in his tent making stew. Now Esau was so hungry that he wanted some of this stew, and Jacob said he would give it to him if he gave his birthright. So as the firstborn son, Esau was entitled to most of his father's Isaac's possessions, and he also had the responsibility of taking care of the rest of the family when his father passed away, or when his father died. As a second-born son, Jacob would not have gained any of these possessions, and he would not have had the responsibility of taking care of the family. So Jacob wanted Esau to give up all of his future possessions just for one bowl of food. And what did Esau do? He gave up his birthright to Jacob just to have one meal and to fulfill his hunger. Now verse 34 reads, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." So what does it mean when the passage says that Esau despises his birthright? Well, the passage said this because he did not take his role as the eldest son seriously. He was willing to give up his responsibility to take care of his family just for one meal. Esau did not have any self-control. He was so hungry that he did whatever it took not to be hungry anymore. But what does this passage tell us about Jacob? Jacob was a very, very calculated person. He was a trickster. He recognized that his brother was willing to give up anything just for a meal, just to fulfill his hunger. He realized his brother didn't look past today, while Jacob was also thinking about the future. So let's talk a little bit about the story that we read today. We were introduced to several characters. Some of them we already knew, and others that were new to us. So we met Isaac and Rebekah last week. Last week we talked about how they were just married. This week we see them expanding their family. Rebekah couldn't have children, and Isaac prayed, and God allowed Rebekah to get pregnant with twins. God also told Rebekah that her sons would be divided, that they would be different, and we see that difference even in their appearance. Esau was large and hairy. He also had red hair, while Jacob was smooth and slender built. And they were a lot different in their personalities as well. But what can we learn about the passage today? So we see that Isaac prayed to God in his time of need. Now Isaac was now alone. Both his parents were no longer alive, but he had the same trust in God that Abraham had. So he wanted God to answer his prayer of giving his wife children. We see that God answered Isaac's prayer. He did this not only because Isaac asked him, but because of what he had promised Abraham. We talked about this a few weeks ago when he first came to the land of Canaan. God promised that he would take care of Abraham and Abraham's descendants. So that includes Isaac and includes Jacob and Esau. We also learned that Jacob was very crafty. He was a trickster. Now what does this mean? He used his brother's hunger against him and was able to take his birthright. We also learned that Esau was too hasty. Now what does it mean by Esau being too hasty? He allowed his hunger to override his common sense or his responsibilities as the eldest son. He allowed Jacob to take his birthright just for a meal. Now for us as Christians, there's some behaviors that we want to copy and some behaviors that we don't want to keep in our lives. So the ones that we want to copy are those of Isaac and Rebekah. When we have a need, when we have an issue, we are to go to God. Now Isaac wanted to start a family with Rebekah, and he prayed for God's help. Rebekah was worried about her children when they were moving around a lot in her stomach, so she asked God to make sure everything was okay. Now the behavior we want to stay away from is that of Jacob and Esau. So as the second son, it was not right for Jacob to ask for his brother's birthright or to force him to give it up just for one meal. And for Esau shouldn't have allowed himself to be guided by his hunger. He should have thought clearly and said, no, this is something that is important to me, is my responsibility as an eldest son. I need to keep it for myself. He could have gone elsewhere and gotten a meal from another family member. Now that we've read the story and talked about it a bit, why don't we answer some questions as a group and talk about the story amongst yourselves. So the first question, is there anything that stood out to you in this story? Now for a second question, like Esau, we all have strong needs, maybe hunger, but we also have strong emotions like sadness and anger, and these aren't bad things, but we can't let them guide our actions. It's when we do that and we end up hurting ourselves or hurting others, that's when they become bad. So the question is, has there ever been a time when your emotions led you to make a bad decision? Now our last question, the third question, is a little tough to answer, but it's still a good one to think about. Is there anything we can do to help us control our emotions? Now controlling our emotions is not easy, and it does not happen overnight. It takes prayer and it takes practice. We have to identify those emotions that cause us to act negatively. What makes us angry? What makes us sad? What do we do when we're angry or we're sad? Do our actions, when we feel these emotions, do they hurt others, or do they hurt others or do they hurt ourselves? When we do that, when we recognize our emotions and when we recognize our actions, what can we do to start making changes to the way we respond to our emotions, to our needs? Now we can't be like Esau, be willing to give up what is important to us just for one meal. But we also can't be like Jacob, willing to trick those who are close to us. So these are the three questions that I hope we can focus on. Is there anything that stood out to you in the story? Has there ever been a time when your emotions led you to make a bad decision? Is there anything we can do to help us control our emotions? So take some time to answer these questions.